Hello, my beautiful friends. My name is Kim, and I hope you're having a fabulous day today. If you are interested in true crime like I am, I hope that you'd consider hitting that subscribe button. Today, we're going to be talking about Peter Madsen. You may or may not have heard of him already, but I promise you, you won't forget just the absolute madness is this story ever again. Peter was once described as being angry with God and everyone else along with him. A man who has a hard time getting along with others and wants to do everything his way. But some people just knew him as the submarine guy. I'm pretty sure that rang more than a few bells for some of you, and you probably have more than an idea of where we're heading. But for now, let's take a look at this case all the way back from the beginning. This case is out of Denmark, and my old boss happens to be from Denmark. So this video is dedicated to you, Klaus. Get ready for me to slaughter a few names and places, but first, a word from our sponsor. Is mental health management as important to you as it is me? If so, Cerebral is an option for you. I am a longtime partner with Cerebral and know how important mental health is. Cerebral is a mental health platform that performs clients access to ongoing online medication management and therapy for anxiety, depression, insomnia, and other conditions, all for a flat monthly rate. Additionally, in some states, treatment for ADHD, bipolar, and PTSD are also offered. If you've gone through a major life event or you're going through a stressful time, Cerebral therapists are here for you. They specialize in grief, trauma, relationship, family issues, LGBTQI, and more. I like that I can make my appointment from the comfort of my home. No traffic, waiting rooms to deal with. Cerebral operates in a telemedicine model, meaning you can schedule visits with your provider, care counselor, or therapist when it's most convenient for you. Who doesn't like convenience? Do not have to leave my house? Sign me up. Your information is always private with Cerebral. Their comprehensive care model is designed for long-term treatment, and what's amazing is that 75% of users reported an improvement after their second visit. Not to mention that Cerebral is super affordable by being 3 times less than traditional therapy services. Let's take a look on how to get started. It's fairly easy to navigate. You start by filling out a short online form answering questions to help Cerebral understand your symptoms. From there, you can always choose to subscribe to one of their 3 different membership options based on the needs and your budget. Cerebral offers a convenient mobile app. It's like having a full mental health team on call whenever and wherever you need them. Membership options may include a combination of care counseling, therapy, and prescription medication. Plans include regular video calls or phone conversations with your provider. Prescribed medications delivered monthly with free shipping and monthly video calls and unlimited online messaging with a care counselor or licensed specialist. Things come up, important life events, and I like to know that there is somebody available just a click away. Click on my link in the description and start Cerebral today, and your first month starts out at only $30. You're worth it. Today's case sounds like a movie, but I promise you that this time, life is stranger than fiction. Peter Madsen was born in January of 1971 in a far, far away place called Denmark, to a somewhat unusual couple. There was a 36-year age gap between his mother and his father. Their marriage just didn't quite make it past their differences. They divorced when Peter was only 6 years old, and Peter went to live with his father. Peter had more than a few things to say about him. He said, I think how children in Germany must have felt if their dad was a commandant in a concentration camp. Wow, Peter, tell us how you really feel. Peter's father was allegedly a very violent man. Peter just couldn't ever seem to say anything good about his father, but we do know that Peter did pick up something from his father that will stick with him for the rest of his life: a love for rockets. Peter founded his first company when he was only 15 years old. He called it the Danish Space Academy and used it to buy space parts to build a rocket. That is pretty ambitious for a 15-year-old. Now, this is also something that's going to be a big deal and consistent part of Peter's life. He was always creating, always founding companies and actually getting the funding to back them. He seems like a pretty resourceful guy, and he went on to study engineering to try to put some of that resourcefulness to good use. He didn't stick with it for that long, though. He apparently left his studies after he'd learned enough to build submarines and rockets, and then, in keeping with what will follow for the rest of Peter's career, he went on to his own way. But most time, Peter did what Peter set out to do. In 2008, after some pretty successful crowdfunding and tests, Peter built the Nautilus, a 56-foot submarine, the largest privately made vessel of its kind. He launched it off the coast of Copenhagen, Denmark, with a big ceremony. Both national and local press showed up, and he was in the headlines for quite a long time afterwards. I mean, it was a huge achievement, and it made Peter pretty famous, especially locally. People knew who he was, and he was pretty much always in the press for his next big project and achievement, and he always had the next big idea lined up. And you may be asking, what was the next big idea? Well, it was outer space. Seriously, Peter wanted to launch himself into space in the first privately made rocket ship, and he had a pretty good head start. He teamed up with a former NASA consultant and architect, Christian von Berger, and together they founded Copenhagen Suborbitals in 2011. They successfully launched a rocket off the coast of Bornholm, a Danish island in the Baltic Sea, and things really seemed to be looking good for Peter and his goals. He'd really made some big steps towards getting himself, well, up there. But Peter was a tough guy to work with. He described himself as an inventrepreneur. His friends and family, well, not so much. Friends said that Peter was eccentric and uncompromising and didn't like to be contradicted. His brother later described him as his own greatest enemy, and Peter proved to be that in more ways than one. He tripped on his own feet and he messed up pretty badly. In 2014, he accused Christian, the NASA consultant, of putting his family over the rocket building. And at that point, after putting up with Peter for years, Christian just had enough. He quit the project, and Peter knew it was his fault. He said, "I'm fully aware that my temper is to blame for Christian's exit, and I'm very sorry it has to come to this." This was a chance for Peter to turn things around, but Peter didn't learn, and he didn't keep his temper in check. Later that year, he argued with the board of the company and managed to get thrown off of his own project. Yes, could you imagine? You're sweating tears, and they're like, "Get out of here." He went on to found another company, this time naming it Rocket Madsen's Ship Laboratory, or RML, Space Lab for short. And he set out to compete with his former friends and colleagues. Then he argued with the volunteer maintenance crew of the Nautilus after working and leading them for 3 years. Then he argued with the board of the company who'd help him create and maintain the Nautilus, and they then transferred the ownership of the sub over to him. My guess is they were tired of him and they just wanted to wash their hands of him after that, and they probably had a way easier time working on their projects without him. After this argument, Peter sent one of the board members a text, and in the message he said, quote, "You may think that a curse is lying on the Nautilus. That curse is me. There will not be peace on the Nautilus for as long as I exist," unquote. Well, he wasn't wrong about that, and that text will be even more haunting as we learn more. Peter was pretty much on his way after that. He even ended up living on the Nautilus while he was busy working on his next big project, beating his former friends into space. Whether he was successful or not, well, that's not really easy to say. He made headlines, again, running tests and training to become a self-made astronaut, but he never made it to space.
Incredible!
He did, however, get noticed by a certain journalist, and their names will forever be tied together, whether he ever makes it to space or not. The journalist's name was Kim Wall, and she was a 30-year-old, very successful freelance journalist from Trollsberg, Sweden. She'd worked everywhere: Australia, India, New York, Hong Kong, you name it. She liked to cover just anything and everything that piqued her interest, from feminism in China to smuggling of illegal beetle records into Cuba during the Cold War. And she had just pitched the idea of covering the Danish space race to her magazine. They were interested, and so was she. And she tried for months to get in contact with Peter. She was also on a bit of a timeline and didn't have long to wrap this one up. Kim Wall at the time was based between New York and Beijing. Her boyfriend was a Danish designer living in Copenhagen, and they were about to move together to Beijing. Months went by, and she hadn't heard anything from Peter. It was getting a bit too close, and Kim was starting to lose steam on the project when Peter finally reached out to her. She'd written to him back in March, and he didn't get back to her until August, but it apparently was perfect timing. Kim just so happened to be in Copenhagen visiting her boyfriend and getting things ready for her move to Beijing. They were actually throwing a party to say goodbye to friends that very night on August 10th, 2017, and now Kim had exactly what she'd wanted: an interview with Peter, the submarine guy, Madsen. And it even got better. It turned out that Peter and Kim were actually neighbors, and they met for a cup of tea and an interview in Peter's space lab. Kim got everything she needed. She was already super excited about the story and was going to write when Peter offered to take her out on a trip on the submarine later that evening. Kim was excited. She agreed, and Peter picked her up at a harbor later that evening around 7 p.m., and they headed out to sea. The trip was supposed to last a couple of hours. Kim's boyfriend started to get a bit worried when she didn't show up a good few hours later. He even went down to the harbor to see if he could find her himself, and finally at 1:45 in the morning, he called police to report her missing. 3 hours later, a warning was issued to Coast Guards alerting them that there may have been an accident involving a submarine, and they sent out boats and helicopters to search for them. They found nothing until the next day at 10 a.m. in the morning when Peter's submarine surfaced off the coast of Kai, this place, a town about 60 miles away from Copenhagen and from where Peter had picked him up. The submarine was sinking, Peter was swimming to the shore, and Kim, well, Kim was nowhere to be seen. The Coast Guards picked Peter up, and by this point, the news was already blowing up about Peter's submarine and the missing journalist. The Coast Guard quickly got Peter to the police, but Peter didn't seem particularly worried. There's footage of him nodding and smiling and giving a thumbs up to the journalists on his way there and telling them that he was okay. Okay, all right, Peter, but where's Kim? He didn't know where she was, he told the police. He actually told the police that he dropped Kim off in the city that night before he kept on sailing down the coast. He said his submarine was now having a technical failure, which was why it had sunk, but the police were not buying Peter's story. They actually arrested Peter for involuntary manslaughter, even though there was no body. Nothing had been found at this point. They actually had no idea of anything that had happened to Kim, but they arrested him. But that didn't stop them, apparently. They locked him up and took him to the court the next day. Already by then, his story had changed. He said Kim had died in an accident. He said he dropped the hatch on her head while she was getting into the submarine, and he'd panicked. He then tied a rope around her and pulled her body out of the submarine and buried her at sea. This was plausible. The hatch was made of metal and weighed 70 kilograms or 154 pounds, but that didn't explain why he'd done all of the other things, like sailing around afterwards and dumping her body at sea. And why all the details about the rope? It didn't sit right with the police. They didn't change their charges, and Peter stayed locked up. 10 days later, a man biking along the coast of Amager, an island in the south of Copenhagen, and also between where Peter had picked Kim up and then at the bay, and then later found swimming in, well, the man had a pretty gruesome discovery. He found a human torso. That was it. Just the torso. No head, no arms, or anything else. DNA later confirmed that it belonged to Kim Wall, and an autopsy reported that she'd been stabbed 15 times in and around her genitals. That's when the police changed their charges. They upped them to just plain and simple manslaughter, and they changed them again a month later when divers found Kim's head, limbs, clothes, and saw the knife in a plastic bag weighed down with pieces of metal. But why did the police change their charges this time? Well, you see, Peter had stuck to his story about Kim dying from being hit in the head by the hatch. But the autopsy actually revealed no injuries to Kim's head. Strange, right? What it did find, though, were ligature marks on her wrists and ankles, and now the police had more to charge him with. They charged him with sexual assault, but that did not include intercourse, improper handling of a corpse, and murder. And Peter changed his story again. Now Kim hadn't been hit in the head. He'd only said that to spare her family from hearing the traumatic story of how she'd actually died. Yeah, I just said that for the family, actually. She died of carbon monoxide poisoning. Carbon monoxide poisoning or getting bashed in the head with a hatch. Oh, I was just sparing them. He said she'd been inside the submarine and he'd been mysteriously locked outside by some terrible accident. Then the engine had malfunctioned, filling the submarine with carbon monoxide, and Kim had died. This makes so much sense now, Peter. Yeah, you spare his family, especially because you then dismembered her corpse and tossed her body parts into the sea. But no, he hadn't actually killed her. That would just be ridiculous. I'm sorry, Peter, but it's not looking good for you. His case went to court in March of 2018. Over 4 weeks, the judges heard testimony from just a wild group of people. There were submarine experts, forensic pathologists, and members of the underground BDSM club. Yes, oddly, we jump from submarine experts to BDSM. You see, Peter was into the harder things in life, and he'd been a member of their BDSM group for quite a while before he actually was kicked out for being too passive. Whatever that means in this case, I am not an expert on the topic. No judgment to those who are. Submissive, isn't that part of the title? I don't know. They probably just thought he was a creep and they didn't have the heart to tell him, but that wasn't really the point anyway. All of these testimonies were actually there for a different reason, and they did just the trick. Their goal was to prove that Peter was more than just a little bit eccentric. Investigators had already found snuff videos and hardcore porn back on his submarine, and the internet searches they found, beheading, girl, and agony on his computer, they could see that that search had already led Peter to click on a video of someone getting their throat. And this wasn't the first time he'd looked it up either. The police found previous searches from beheading, hangings, and women getting murdered on his hard drive, as well as his stash of torture, snuff, and execution videos. Peter's searches were all kinds of messed up and disturbing. Now, the prosecution said that Kim's murder, well, it was premeditated. He may have not known who Kim was before all of this, but Kim probably just walked into Peter's life at a really, really bad time. Peter's ambition to beat his old friends, the suborbitals, in this great privately owned space race, it had hit a pretty serious bump in the road. He was supposed to launch his own rocket and was excited to stick it to the dirty suborbitals, but his project suddenly ran out of money. I don't know what happened to Peter. Usually he's pretty resourceful. Maybe he just ran out of luck. Maybe his personality had finally caught up with him and he just burnt too many bridges. Who knows? But to the surprise of everyone working on the project with him, he canceled the launch. Witnesses said he seemed dispirited or even a little bit manic after this decision. An Austrian director interviewing Peter for a documentary the same day as Kim said that he had a strange energy about him. And another witness said they seen him that very evening casually walking through a crowd of festival goers when they saw a sword just sticking out of his backpack. Who knows what was going on in his head, but the police sure had a good try of figuring it out. They said that Peter was already on to his next big project and it had nothing to do with space. Peter wanted to recreate one of those snuff films he liked to watch so much. That's why he invited Kim back to his submarine that night. That's why he had a camera. That's why he had zip ties, a saw, a knife, all with him when she got there. Then all he had to do was get creative. But Peter disagreed. He didn't say much, if anything, during his trial, except when he was called to the stand. Then he got really excited. Maybe it was being back in front of the cameras and all the international attention that it did for him. Who can say for sure? But he admitted to lying to earlier investigators, but he was really sticking to the latest story of Kim dying of carbon monoxide poisoning while he was locked out on the deck. And then he seemed to go off on a tangent. He kept losing his train of thought and just started rambling about anything and everything. The judge had to ask him several times, stick to the essentials, and Peter seemed to really have a hard time doing that. He even seemed to forget who he was. Sometimes he referred to himself in the third person. Sometimes he just flipped tenses and started speaking in the past or the present tense, saying things like, Peter is talking a lot. He's happy sharing his dreams with Kim. It was just bizarre. And it's not always clear who he's talking about either. He refers to both Kim and the Nautilus as she. At one point, he says, quote, she was lying there quietly without a sound, and he smacked her cheeks to try to reboot her, unquote. And no one could tell if he meant Kim or the submarine. He apologized when he was explaining how he'd cut up her body, not for what he'd done, but for how he explained it. He said it sounded like a bad movie, and here the prosecution pushed him about their theory of him making his own snuff film. He says it's like making a movie, and they're saying he's making a movie, but a snuff movie, but anyways. They asked him if all of those videos he had watched had inspired him to mutilate Kim's body, and Peter said no. Wait till you hear what else he had to say. He said watching videos like that actually brought out his empathy towards women and were really cathartic for him. He said those snuff films were actually no different than watching a Hollywood blockbuster like Kill Bill or Seven, and he didn't seem to, or didn't want to seem like he understood the difference between real snuff films and movies. He put up a real fight, but by the end, Peter pled guilty to murder. He was also found guilty of the charges of sexual assault and improper handling of a corpse, and he was sentenced to life. He later admitted from behind bars that he did kill Kim, but the police to this day are not sure exactly how she died. They suspect he mimicked his latest snuff video he had watched. Peter would never tell. You'd think that was the end of this story and he's locked up and he's actually admitted to the crime, but no, this story continues. October 2020, Peter struck again. He'd somehow managed to create a fake gun and a bomb belt and broke out of prison. He didn't get very far, and after having to sit around for over an hour and a half with the police pointing their guns at him, the police managed to figure out that everything he had was fake. He got another 21 months added to his sentence for that little stunt. I feel sentences in Denmark are a little bit lighter than they are here in the States. I mean, 21 months for escaping a fake bomb, a gun, like, no, he would definitely get longer than 21 months. But nonetheless, in an interview, actually, that interview he'd had while he was waiting for Kim to come that day, he admitted to possibly being psychopathic. Maybe he was laying the foundation for what he was about to do, or maybe he was having a real moment of clarity and self-awareness. I just wish he'd taken that self-awareness in a different direction instead of murdering poor Kim. This diagnosis was later confirmed, though, a psychiatric evaluation that also added narcissistic tendencies and a severely deviant sexuality to the list. Shocker. Here's a quote from Peter. "I'm a one-man operation, and that's the strength of a dictatorship. Good luck with all that, Peter, in prison. I do also just want to point out that a life sentence in Denmark is not quite the same as it is here in the States. Life in Denmark is typically will get you 15 to 17 years without parole, and very rarely ends up with the convict actually spending the rest of their life in jail. The justice system there is a lot more focused on rehabilitation rather than punishment. But who knows what will happen when it comes to Peter? Maybe they'll take a look at him at the end of his sentence and decide he's still a little bit too eccentric to be out on the streets. We'll have to wait and see. But Kim's family are staying strong. Her family and friends have set up a fund in her name called the Kim Wall Memorial Fund to support young women working in journalism. They want it to be so everyone focuses on the future instead of what happened that night in the submarine. And they want her legacy to live on. So let's just take a moment to remember Kim and all of her work. She's really seemed to be one strong woman and just as fearless, both in the stories she's covered and in her love of travel and life and in on-the-ground journalism.
Hi, my name is Kimberly. I'm currently in the Pacific. The lady commercially took up some supply ship on my way back from Venezuela. We've been reporting on the nuclear waste sites threatened by climate change. This is exactly the kind of stories I like to do.
But what do you guys think? From those of you who know this story already, did you learn anything new? And those of you just hearing about it today, just wow. It really is something out of a movie. And it would not surprise me if it ended up being a film at some point. I have my own theory that Peter just kind of snapped that day and Kim just touched at something dark inside him. He was married to a journalist who later divorced him, and I wonder if it had something to do with why he picked Kim out of everyone else. He'd done interviews with many other people, some of them even that day, and he'd invited many women back to his submarine before. Maybe he just clicked with Kim better or just liked the way that she looked. I still think it was the journalism part of it, but Peter's not talking anymore, probably just cooking up another extreme break out of prison plot. But let me know what you guys think of this in the comment section down below. Please check out the Kim Wall Memorial Fund if you want to help keep her memory alive and contribute to helping other women in journalism. I'll put the link down in the description box below. If you guys want to leave a notebook or pen in memory of Kim and her family, that would be wonderful down in the comments. I want to thank all of you for stopping by here today. If you're watching from Denmark, I'm told you guys like to make people like me say, "Rulgrad Melfyr." You're welcome. Apparently, it's a Danish dessert of red berries and cream. No idea. How did I do? Did I do it or did I butcher it? I 100% guaranteed butchered it. But anyways, a big shout out to all of my channel members. Their support helps me to make more videos just like this one. Maybe not as wild, but still crimey. Take a look at their names. They're on the screen. If you would like to become a channel member or a Patreon, my links are in the description. If you don't know how to do it from your phone, there is a little video. Well, if you guys have made it to the end, you guys are rock stars and I love you to death. There are more true crime videos in my Crimey Cases playlist for you to check out. Thanks for being here. I will see you in my next one. And remember, if you see something, say something, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.